All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I know some people will continue to trickle in here, but I wanted to first start by just saying thank you to everyone for joining today. This is the first Dewey seminar where we're going to present some of the research that's being done using some of the data that's available on the Dewey platform. I wanted to first start by saying thank you to everyone who's attending, and also thank you to our panelists today. I'm Evan. I'm the CEO and founder of Dewey. Obviously, Dewey is still in its pretty early stages, and so I really appreciate having you guys kind of here as early users of the platform, and just want you to know that I'm obviously really thankful for you all being here, but I also am always open for feedback. And so, as you guys are starting to use the platform, starting to use data, have recommendations of different data sets that you would like to see on the platform, that type of feedback is incredibly valuable to me. So always feel free to reach out. And a great way to do that is by using the community. And so I'll post some links in the chat here in a bit to kind of sign up for the community. And again, always feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is evan@deweydata.io. And yeah, always open for feedback. So just wanted to quickly say thanks. So this is a bi-weekly research panel. We'll do this pretty regularly, and hopefully, we actually already have the next one on the calendar where we have researchers from Wisconsin and Boston University talking about consumer demand spillover from EV charging stations at retail centers. So if you haven't already, please sign up for that one as well. And I'll post the link here in a second. But really, I want to get to the main event for today. And so really excited to introduce Swami and Ju. They're from TCU's Neeley School of Business, and they're going to be presenting on some research they've done using some of the SafeGraph data, but around COVID-19 vaccinations, business activity, and firm value. I'll let them kind of do the intro from there. But yeah, Swami and Ju, you guys can take it away.
Thank you, Evan. Big shout out to Dewey for inviting us to lead off the seminar series here. Thank you to all the participants who've registered for this seminar. I'm pleased to introduce our co-author, Ju Ren, who's a colleague of mine at TCU Department of Finance, who is going to also speak a little bit about this paper. My co-authors, the other co-authors, John Bijak and Vasil Mihal, unfortunately, are teaching as we speak right now. If they were not, of course, they would have been very thrilled to be here as well. As the title suggests, this paper, we are actually examining the economic effects of COVID vaccinations. And I'm going to describe to you what we do in this paper. But before I do that, sort of a quick roadmap, I'd like to go for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then hand over the presentation to Ju, who will go through our results. So I want to lay out the motivation and give you sort of a preview of what our data looks like. Thanks to Evan for sharing the SafeGraph data with us for this project. We also have another paper that was published in the Journal of Finance quite recently, which also used the SafeGraph data. So the motivation for this paper, let me sort of, the basic background is the adverse effect that COVID-19 had on the US economy. Sort of not surprisingly, there was a big sort of a shock to the economy at the onset of the pandemic. The GDP shrank 9%, unemployment rose 13%. There was a big effect on retail spending, which declined almost 60%. This has been documented by Goolsby and his co-author Syverson in the Journal of Public Econ paper 2021. We have a paper that I just mentioned where we looked at sort of the political leanings of CEOs and how those policies were shaped by their political beliefs and the impact it had on shareholder value. This was published in the Journal of Finance as well, where we looked at this using SafeGraph data as well. So the bottom line is there was a big shock to the US economy. And so when the vaccines were first announced, naturally, there was a lot of optimism about what this meant for the recovery in the U.S. economy, and more particularly how consumer spending would respond, to vaccines. So when Pfizer announced its phase 3 clinical trial results, a very high efficacy rates of its BioNTech vaccines, the market obviously greeted this with a lot of optimism. And then there was a subsequent announcement by Moderna, and the EUA, the emergency use authorization, came in December. And then, of course, the whole vaccination campaign sort of got kickstarted. So that's kind of setting the stage for what this paper attempts to address. Now, of course, one may say, okay, so this isn't it kind of obvious, right? So you have a big market reaction. There's a reversal to the pandemic. Hopefully, the vaccine starts, favorably sort of affecting or reversing sort of the public health crisis that the COVID-19 pandemic sort of, drove. And we argue that there are lots of challenges here. So we call this sort of the defense of the null, of why one might not sort of expect this positive impact in terms of economic output. So as we all know, the highlight of if I were to sort of talk about sort of a headline grabbing event, that would be the Djokovic Novak sort of saying I'm not going to get vaccinated, and then of course there was all those issues with the US Open, but it goes far beyond that, right? So we sort of lay down sort of some of the chief arguments why you might not expect sort of the vaccines to have the intended effects, not from a public health standpoint, but from an economic standpoint. The first is the ideological debate, a divide among individuals. This is sort of highlighted in academic research as well as individual surveys. There are many reasons for this. It could be political, it could be religious, and so forth, right? But there was this divide. Some sort of very eager to take the vaccines, and some not so eager, right? Or sort of very anti-vaccine. The other is sort of regulations. I mean, they play an important role in facilitating sort of this drive for vaccines and also pushing back on vaccinations. So as we all recall, when the Biden administration sort of said, we need to sort of mandate private employers to actually require employees to get vaccinated, this went all the way to the Supreme Court, and this was overturned. And there were a lot of challenges even at a local level. States like California requiring its state employees, school staff and teachers and frontline employees to get vaccinated before coming to the workplace. States like Texas basically saying, no, these mandates are not going to be supported by us. In the business community, of course, there was a divide as well. Companies in the tech industry like Google and Cisco basically said, our employees need to get vaccinated before coming to work. In the finance sector as well, BlackRock, Amex being companies that basically, and even Goldman Sachs requiring such vaccination on part of their employees. And so there was a survey done by Towers, Willis, Watson. They surveyed 600 very large US companies and found that about a third of the employers are basically saying, we're not going to enforce these mandates. The last one is sort of the sort of questionable efficacy of the vaccines to changing sort of variants, right? As far as the SARS-CoV virus goes. All of these things basically mean that it was not entirely clear what would be sort of the resulting uptake in vaccinations in the US. And of course, we have evidence from China, although we don't examine China in this paper, where there were lots of sort of restrictions placed, even when vaccinations were underway, where the economy literally shut down for over 2 years, right? So this is kind of the null hypothesis in this paper, is that there might not be the intended effect in the US economy. Now, on the alternative hypothesis is sort of what is consistent with the anticipatory effect that I talked about earlier when Pfizer sort of announced its phase 3 clinical trials. And the idea is that it goes back to the Goolsbee and Syverson paper. It's an important paper that shows that there are two things driving behavior. And what they find is that the 60% decline in the retail activity, over 90% of that can be explained by the consumer fear of the virus. Local restrictions play a very limited role. So in other words, if you sort of compare two sort of regimes with almost the same regulations, one where people fear the virus has a bigger effect, right? So in other words, that drives retail activity. Naturally, if the vaccines can alleviate some of those concerns about the fear of the virus, then there could be a reversal in terms of the economic output. So that is the main idea here. And this optimism is also reflected in an academic paper in terms of the economic effects. It's by Viral Acharya at NYU and his co-authors. And what they find is that they have sort of a general equilibrium model, and they have what is called a vaccine progress indicator and its impact on asset prices. And what they do is that they show that labor market participation sort of, evolves over time. And they can either sort of increase the participation or decrease the participation, right? So vaccines can alleviate that. And what they show is that the welfare gains from vaccinations can be anywhere between 5 and 15%, right, aggregate. So this is kind of, support. This is sort of our argument, is that, there's got to be some sort of effect. At least this is the alternative hypothesis that we sort of, present in the paper. Now, before we go through sort of the litany of results, let me summarize, because we may not have a chance to see all the results here. Our bottom line result is that we are trying to sort of explain retail activity measured at the establishment from the SafeGraph data. This is what we're trying to explain. And what is our independent variable is the vaccination rate. We use the second dose of the full doses of either Pfizer or Moderna, or in Johnson & Johnson, it's the one dose. So a 10% increase in vaccination rate is associated with about 6.6% increase in retail visits. We'll go describe essentially how we sort of model this in our regressions. We do a battery of tests and specifications, so I don't know if we'll have time for all of that, but we'll try to explain that. And so the other important result in the paper is that from a firm standpoint, since we're able to see which parents or which firms sort of own these establishments, so we aggregate these effects at the firm level, and we find that these things have positive effects on sales, on profitability, and on strategic decision of firms to actually expand stores in that county. Now, these visits translate also, these higher visits are also associated with higher employment. So using the SafeGraph data, we are able to measure who these employees are inside these establishments. And we find that as vaccination rates go up, there is more labor market participation in those establishments. And the last thing we do is we do a cross-sectional test. Not all firms unequivocally benefit. There are some firms benefit more than the others. Those that actually did very poorly at the onset of the pandemic benefit the most. Firms in industries that are non-essential, meaning, like movie theaters, apparel stores, luxury items, Party City being an example as well, actually experience more benefits. Using SafeGraph data, we are also able to identify percentage of online sales. So these are firms that could not pivot to online sales at the time of the pandemic actually benefit the most. And last but not the least, those that did financially very poorly during 2020 benefited more. And the other set of results, we look at sort of the channel, what drives this, and mainly it is we're able to sort of pinpoint that it's actually individuals visiting the stores that get vaccinated. That's the primary channel. The other is the relaxation of local restrictions, right? As vaccination rates go up, that leads to sort of, relaxations being, restrictions being relaxed. That also contributes to the results. And so, as Ju will also point out, there are some limitations as well, which I won't talk about right now. The bottom line is that vaccines create private benefits to firms and its shareholders. And so what is good from a public health standpoint is also good for shareholders. That is the primary takeaway from our paper. And so before we look at the results, we present three main specifications here. The first, the workhorse model in our paper, is the store or the establishment fixed effects. Because when you run a regression of across counties, if you aggregate, observations at the county, you may have counties that are always sort of, very restrictive in nature, that don't, despite high vaccinations, don't go visit the stores. And then you have counties where people always shop, no matter what the vaccination status is. So when you pull these things at a county level, you may not find a positive effect. Or a negative effect, right? So to circumvent that, we are looking at within the store, and Ju is going to explain how we do that. So the X's are basically controls for county demographics and firm characteristics, and Y is the fixed effects, right? So this is essentially within variation at the store. sometimes at the county, sometimes at the industry. So, but the store fixed effects is our main specification. The other two is to account for this, what we call endogeneity. So it could be reverse causation or something else. So it's correlation is not the same as causation. So we do two types of analysis, what is called a difference in difference analysis and an instrumental variables approach to get a causal estimate of what this effect is. And we find that the result is causal as well. So before I turn things over to you, main data comes from SafeGraph, which is a geolocation data. When visitors to the store enable the location on their smartphones, SafeGraph is able to collect data, anonymized data on how many people visit the store and lots of other pieces of information. So this is our primary data. We have about 8.1 million establishment week observations in our data, so lots of data, right? Vaccination data comes from CDC primarily, and for other tests, it comes from Canada as well. And some tests require the zip code level information, which we collect. Vaccination rate comes from California Department of Public Health. The other data sources are pretty standard, so I won't be describing them. So the two main things being SafeGraph for visits and the CDC or the California data for the vaccination rate. All right, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to let Ju Ren, my co-author, take it away for the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to
Okay, thank you, Swami. So I'm going to share some results that we got from the analysis here. So first, we run the regression of vaccine rate and store visit. And the store visit is the dependent variable. And we have considered many different control variables, such as the firm level control and also the county level, the demographic control. And we have tried various fixed effect as well. And across all these specifications here, the coefficient on the vaccine rate is significant. And model 4 here is our benchmark model. So here we use a store level fixed effect. So this fixed effect will fully absorb all the time invariant factors that may influence the foot traffic. So it's a very strong restriction here. And across the first 4 models, when we try the state industry fixed effect, the county industry fixed effect, the store fixed effect, we observe 10% increase in the vaccine rate is associated with roughly 6% increase in the foot traffic. So given the average weekly changing visit is 5.6% in our sample, this point estimate is not only statistically significant, but economically, it's large in magnitude as well. And in model 5 here, we add the time fixed effect in addition to the store fixed effect, and that the coefficient becomes smaller as we expected because it's removed the time variation. And we have done a lot of robustness check to make sure the result holds. So we have tried to use the change in visit instead of the level as the dependent variable, and the results remain. And also, we have tried to use different time periods. So after April, the vaccine rate in US is higher, and we find the results remain if we use some sub-period. And one concern that we have is, what if the result is mainly driven by the political polarized firm or those politically polarized counties? So we try to exclude those and find our result is still robust. And for the identification, not only that we use the fixed effect, we also rely on the staggered introduction of vaccine in the US relative to the Canada. So as we can see from the graph here, Canada and the US have very different vaccine rates from end of the 2020, beginning of 2021 to the May of 2021. So the Canada vaccine rate is always very low, so we consider this group as the untreated group. And the US has higher vaccine rate, so we consider it as the treated group. And so for Canada in this period, it's really untreated because Canada closed the border, and it's not the case that the Canadian can cross the border and get a vaccine in the US. And we conduct a difference in difference analysis to compare US and Canada before and after the vaccine. And here is the graph. So in the analysis, we only consider the US and the Canadian province, which are on the border. So in other sense, we are really comparing a store like McDonald's in Vancouver versus the McDonald's in Seattle. So it's not a random McDonald's in Miami because the weather is different, maybe the shopping pattern is different. But here we only consider the border states. And here is the diff results for the regression. So the dependent variable is the visit again. And what we really care is the interaction term, the US times post. Post is after March, where US already has a much higher vaccine rate, and Canada, the vaccine rate is almost below 5%. It's very low. It's dramatically different. And we can see the interaction term here is significant. So it says in the US, after the vaccine introduced and after people got vaccine, the shopping pattern, the visit is much more compared to the Canada. So this is another evidence that suggests the vaccine really has an impact on the visit, and the relationship is causal because of this diff analysis. So the next question we ask is, what are the channels where this vaccine rate can translate into the store visit? So SafeGraph provides data on the customer CBG. So we observe when the vaccine rate for a store area goes up, a greater fraction of customer actually come from the highly vaccinated area. So this finding is consistent with the idea that the store traffic is driven more by the vaccinated individual. And this is inconsistent with the alternative idea that the unvaccinated people just go out more and contribute to the traffic when the vaccine rate increase. And also we show the vaccine rate is positively associated with fewer restriction for a county. So this suggests there's another channel through which vaccine rates can drive up the traffic. It's by removing or relaxing the government restriction on the business. And lastly, SafeGraph has a proxy for the level of employment in an establishment. So it's some device that stays very, very long hours. And we use that as a proxy as the store level employment. And we find a 10% increase in the vaccine rate is associated with around 2.7% increase in the employment at a store level. And we have also done some cross-section analysis, and we find the vaccine impact the business, but the impact is different for different firms. And the impact tends to be stronger when the firm has experienced greater initial loss during the COVID period. And we also find certain firms that are in non-essential industry, and if they have lower online sales, then they tend to be more impacted by the vaccine. And if they have declining performance in the last 3 quarters of 2020 in terms of financial performance, then the impact of vaccine on the visit is stronger for those firms as well. And we also look at how a market react to the vaccine. So we conduct a event study on the first vaccine announcement date, November 9th, 2020. And what we find is for the firms that are non-essential, greater initial loss and bigger decline in the performance, it's basically the same set of firm on my previous slides. So they tend to have greater announcement return on this date. So this is the market really reacts to the announcement, and it's especially stronger for those firms, which is confirmed later. They have experienced the better and greater benefit from the vaccine. And we find this increase in visits from the vaccine rate can indeed translate into higher performance in terms of the firm's savings and sales and earnings. And we find 10% increase in the foot traffic is associated with 4 to 5% increase in the firm quarterly sales, and also a 0.25 to 0.5% increase in the quarterly EPS. So the vaccine rate has an impact on the firm strategic decision as well. And we find this by exploring the supply side effect. We find the vaccine rate has an impact on the firm's location decision where they expand the store. So the next question we ask is there any limitation on the vaccine? And we examine a time period, which is the Delta surge period in the summer of 2021. So this is the case where in terms of the medical efficacy rate, the vaccine is less effective to this new variant. And we add a dummy variable to our benchmark model. So the Delta variant variable will be 1 for the summer 2021 period, and it will be 0 otherwise. And we find the interaction term is negative and significant. So this suggests for those Delta surge period, the impact of vaccine rate on customer traffic is indeed less, and there is some limitation to the vaccine in terms of this new variant. And we also discussed the non-linearity of this vaccine impact. And we find from the graph here, we can see the higher benefits are associated with the early on period when the lower, when the vaccine level is very low, because we can see the slope is steeper here. And the curve really flatten out. So it says the impact of this vaccine will diminish over the time at higher vaccine rate. So overall, in this paper, we have finds, in addition to the intended public health benefit from this vaccine, we present causal evidence that the vaccine rate can also increase the business activity and increase the shareholder value, although there are some limitation to this vaccine rate impact in terms of the Delta surge and the non-linearity, but overall, it boosts the business activity and increase the shareholder value. So that's all I have. Thank you very much, and really looking forward to the comments.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. That was a fascinating presentation. And like I said, I'm going to definitely share this recording with everyone who registered. Okay. I wasn't able to post it quick enough, and it looks like the chat wasn't going to attendees. So if you have a quick moment, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A. We'll pause for a few seconds to see if 1 or 2 of those questions can come through. But also any questions can be sent to me after when I send out the recording, and I'll be sure to forward it to the this team so that they can answer these questions. But once again, thank you guys so much for presenting. I'll share the recording after, along with a link to all the future seminars, so we can kind of get on a better cadence of having these be more regular, and then also just be a place where we can kind of all meet and talk about the latest research that we see that's getting published, that's out there right now. So with that, I think I'll wrap it up, but thank you both, and hopefully we'll see you all at the next webinar.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you, Evan.
Thanks for the opportunity and of course the data. So just a quick shout out to sort of the value of this data set. I think we've actually found it very useful. So for anybody on this seminar right now, if you are planning on asking interesting questions that require sort of data at a very micro level, I think this is a very promising way to start. So anyway.
I appreciate that. Well, while I have you, any hints or what are you thinking about next in terms of the topics you guys are looking at, the types of data sets you're going to be working with?
No, we are trying to complete this paper and go through the review process. So we've listed some ideas, which are mainly ideas at this point, but there are definitely lots of things that we have in mind as we go through it. So
very cool. Well, I look forward to seeing those. All right. Well, thank you again, and
thank you.
See you next one.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.